Today we're bringing you a most unique story. It's not about a destination or a piece of equipment or innovation. Instead, it's the story of us and how Michigan Golf Live has been blessed to be here for 25 years celebrating the greatest game on earth. We'll share with you the key moments, talk about some of the key people, and have a lot of laughs along the way as we fill in the answers to the question I'm asked most frequently: how did all this come about? Straight ahead. Hi friends, Bill Hobson here, and right at the very beginning, let me say that if you're a fan of long-form storytelling, then these next few moments are going to be right up your alley. This is not one of those quick hit top 10 3-minute videos that you stumble across and are in and out of quickly, because this is the backstory or the origin story of how Michigan Golf Live has been around now for 25 years. Still blows my mind to hear those words come out of my mouth, and I start thinking, how different was my life a quarter century ago? And I'm wondering if you've asked yourself the same question. Some of you may very well have been with us throughout this entire 25-year journey, and there's probably more than a few of you who have no idea what I'm talking about because you weren't alive 25 years ago. Whatever the case, what I want to lay out for you in the moments ahead is a story of gratitude, of heartfelt thankfulness for all of the people and the key moments and the key linchpin decisions that came about that helped launch our original flagship program, our radio show, and the people that said yes to that when it made no sense. And then a few years later, bringing in the television program and the partnerships that have formed because of that over the last couple of decades, and just really being able to tell that story from the standpoint of why did we do it? What is it all about? How does it work? And how much longer do you think you'll go? Right? So we've got a lot of ground to cover, and I thought about a couple different approaches to bring all of this together. One of them was I could just kind of put together a bullet point outline and walk in a monologue fashion through the entire history of MGL. But I think that might even put me to sleep. And so you'll hear from a variety of voices as we move through the timeline a bit together. We'll talk to my original co-host, Jon Bloom, who is now the NBA voice for the Phoenix Suns. We'll talk with my director of production, Gregg, who has watched every swing I've ever made on camera and edited every show we've ever done. The poor guy deserves some sort of recognition for that. We'll talk with one of our crew members who just came on board with us the last few years, but has some really good stories to tell. And what we'll try to do throughout the entirety of this storytelling exercise is say thank you to everybody who had a role in where we are today, from our families to our crews to our partners and everybody else we can think of. This is really fun. This is really a special moment, at least for me, to realize how richly blessed I have been to be a part of this game and a part of storytelling for so very long. So instead of taking the monologue approach, I have asked one of my friends, a member of the Michigan Broadcast Hall of Fame by the name of Art Lewis, who has over 50 years as a radio host and is one of the preeminent interviewers that I've ever met. I've asked him if he would kind of interview me, asking the questions that many of you have asked over the years and maybe still are asking. So we'll start things off with my conversation with Art, and then you'll hear from some of the other guests interspersed amongst that interview. I hope all that makes sense. It's the best way I could think of to tell the story of 25 years of Michigan Golf Live.
All right, so Bill Hobson, you're sitting around in the late 90s. I assume earning a living for your family. You go to your wife and you say, I think I'll quit work and start a golf program. Tell us the history of the beginning of Michigan Golf Live, which is going into its 25th season now.
Yeah, well, I didn't quit work. In fact, work was never really busier at the time. I was just doing lots of little broadcasting things along with a full-time job at the Fox affiliate in Flint. And I was doing my 40-hour-a-week job as part of promotions and programming. I was hosting a daily sports talk show called Bill Overdue on the radio. I was calling Saginaw Valley football games play-by-play, and on Thursdays hosting the coaches show. And for some odd reason, this idea struck me about a golf show on the radio. So I did have the conversation with my wife. And
I hope so.
yeah, I said, well, here, I have an idea. What I'd like to know what you think about it. And she said, I have two questions. Do you think you'll get free golf? And do you think we'll go broke?
Or both.
Yeah. And I said, well, I think the golf part will work out okay. And I kind of think that down the road, this might turn into something, but the original idea to talk about golf on the radio raised a few eyebrows, as you can imagine, because the concept on the surface really doesn't make a lot of sense. And thankfully, we didn't just talk about golf. We talked about people who happen to love golf, and that's kind of what launched us.
So this is, 24 years ago, going into your 25th season now. It's one thing to have an idea. It's another thing to sell the idea and find that first radio station. And you weren't even in TV then. You weren't thinking of TV then.
Right.
You have to find a radio station to put you on the air. How'd you do that when you're an unknown?
Yeah, completely unknown with a bizarre concept. And I'm eternally grateful for a gentleman who has since passed away, but Roger Beowulf had been my general manager at the TV station. I had gone through more general managers than the Lions used to go through quarterbacks. But Roger was one of those guys that I really appreciated and admired and trusted. And as you know, Art, having been in media for a long time, not every manager meets those key criteria. Well,
Correct.
he left the TV station to go buy a couple of small radio stations in Ludington, Michigan and Manistee, Michigan, hardly major markets. But when I started to put some meat on the bones of the idea, he was the first call I made in the professional realm. And I said, what do you think about this? And he gave me some really good advice. And then he said, and I believe in you enough that I'll sign my two stations up to be your first two affiliates. And it meant the world to me to have somebody say, we'll give you a crack. And the first season of the show, we had 5 small stations. We had the Ludington, Manistee markets, we had Flint, we had Lansing, and I can't remember where else, but they were relatively small signal stations. I used to say that you could yell out your window and maybe reach as many people. So we then, we had the foundation for a cobbled together network. But let's all remember 25 years ago, we were not dealing with internet, smartphones, apps, social media.
Right.
When we were talking about doing it live, I then had to figure out, how do I do this? How do I get a show to any of these stations? And then began to kind of do that research and learn that there are pieces of equipment. You and I are talking on something right now that's light years more advanced than what we had back then. We went out and purchased thousands of dollars of gear called a tie line, which you plugged a phone line into, and it upgraded the quality of the signal and sent it back to an uplink facility in Columbus, Ohio, called Radio Sound Network. And then they put it up on satellites, which then distributed it to each of our stations, who had to have a receiver. And needless to say, when we got off the ground, we had a few dollars of technical expenses baked into all this. And so then the search began for sponsorship to get off the ground.
See, that's the next question. First, you have to decide how you're going to distribute the product. Now, you have to tell your wife how you're going to make money with it.
Or at least not lose money.
Or at least not lose money. So what do you do?
I made a phone call to a guy I had never met before. He was the marketing director for the Buick Open, PJ Danhoff. I will forever be grateful to PJ. And I said, we've never met. I have an idea I'd like to run by you. Can I have, 10 minutes of your time? And we were on the phone. There was no Zoom back then. We were just talking on the phone. And I described to him where I thought it could go. And I said, here's my proposal to you. I have figured out that it's going to cost me hard up, just straight out of my pocket costs, $400 a week to do this show to pay for the satellite time. That was it. That's not me getting anything. That was just doing it. And I said, if the Buick Open will sign on to be our title sponsor, I will never change your price. And I said, for the first few years, that's probably not a great deal for you. I think after we get established, it probably turns into a good deal for you and your price will never change. And for some reason, PJ said, we'll do it. He probably said it because it didn't mean that much money-wise to them. But to me, again, this is a pretty big deal. He said, we'll do it.
Yeah.
And we began a relationship until the end of the Buick Open that every spring we would have a phone call and he would say, how much is it this year? And I would say, same as it was the first year. And he would say to me, you know, you're crazy, right? I said, no, we made a deal. And that deal then became a good deal for them. And thankfully, other partners joined in and we began to actually turn a profit instead of just covering our costs for satellite time.
And the joke here is 25 years later, you're doing the show and the PGA eliminated the Buick Open because Buick went away.
Yeah, for sure. And that was such a heartbreaking 2009 when Congress began to demonize golf during the auto bailouts. And how dare these companies sponsor things like golf tournaments? So the Buick went away, and
along with three others, because they had 4 tournaments, if I remember right.
yeah, they did. And to this day now, we fast forward to 2024, the PGA Tour is at risk of losing a lot of its corporate sponsors because of all of the dollars that are flying around. But back then, it was an innocent time. There was a young guy by the name of Eldrick Woods coming on the scene.
Yeah.
When he made his appearance in Warwick Hills, it was the Beatles landing on the Ed Sullivan Theater stage. It was crazy. And those are some of my favorite times that we've had over the years.
All right. So let's talk about a couple of things over these 25 years. First of all, let's talk about the game, because without the game, you don't have a show. How has the game changed? And how have you had to adapt to it over these 25 years?
You know, most of what we have done as a show features and focuses on places and people. And occasionally we weave in tournaments and professional tour coverage, but that's not really been our lifeblood. We haven't been the place you would go for breaking news really until social media came about. So the game, how it has changed really is it went from a minimal connection to the professional world to the Tiger era, where the majority of the conversation was centered around the professional world. And then in these last 2 years, it has started to go back on the other side of that scale to where most of the conversation is disgust with, like, just being disgusted with the way that professionals are handling all of the money and all of these things with Live Golf and the PGA Tour, whether or not tournaments are going to be able to continue at these elevated purses. And the conversations have gone back to, hey, where do you like to play? Where do you go with your buddy's trip? Where do you like to get away? Well, that's kind of always been our core. And I think part of that stability and the storytelling of these special places and trip memories and that kind of thing, I think that's stayed a connected point to a lot of our audience. And I'd like to think that as we head into 24 with this really turbulent world of professional golf, that we'll keep doing what we've done, which is, yeah, hey, listen, the pros are really, really good. They're playing for monopoly money. None of us can relate to that.
Yeah.
So let's celebrate them when they're here, but let's not center our joy of the game on what they're doing, because if we did that, we'd all be miserable.
One of the things that I've noticed over the years, of course, when you started out in the first many years of your program, it was all about men's golf. The LPGA has come on in the last few years and come on strong. And you're doing a little more inclusivity when it comes to the women in golf now, aren't you?
Yeah, well, for several reasons. Number one, when we first came into being 24 years ago, the LPGA had a minimal presence in the state of Michigan. They did a tournament in Lansing, the Oldsmobile Classic, but then it went away for a long time. And it wasn't until Meyer brought back the LPGA over in Grand Rapids for the Meyer LPGA Classic that our state was once again back on the regular rotation. And then, of course, in the middle of the state at the Midland Country Club, the Dow Great Lakes Bay Invitational became the LPGA's only team event. And you couldn't, I mean, you talk about writing a script for success and corporate involvement and community support. It's great. And here's my favorite part, Art. You can talk to the ladies. You can't
Absolutely.
you cannot talk to the guys on the PGA Tour right now until you go through the tour for permission, their agents for access, and then if you get the player after he shot a 75, he doesn't want to talk to you anyways. And it became such a drudgery to try to just have a conversation. I remember back in the old Buick Open days, we could go out to the range, we could go up with a microphone, and if not while the guy's practicing, but before or after he's in his rhythm, you can have a 5-minute interview. You can sit down with him for a while. We've had some great encounters over the years, but in the last 10, 15 years, PGA Tour guys, they are not that enjoyable to talk with, at least during the tournament.
Yeah.
You happen to catch them outside, it's better. And the Champions Tour guys are great because they're just grateful for the chance to play for a living. But you're right, we've really turned our attention a lot to the ladies' game, and a lot more ladies are playing the game these days.
And through that, and you and I have done this at the Dow Great Lakes Bay Invitational. One of the Dow ambassadors is Corey Pavin.
Yeah.
Sat down with him for an hour at a time, just chatting. And you probably couldn't have done that in the old days.
No, you couldn't. And it wouldn't necessarily be because Corey wouldn't have wanted to, but it would have been because the tour has somehow decided that its role is to control and limit communication from players. You see how well that's working for the tour. They're a disaster right now. And part of it is they micromanage every utterance that comes from a player, or every picture, or every little video clip. And my favorite example of that bizarre Big Brother-esque approach by the tour is that if you go out to the Rocket Mortgage Classic at Detroit Golf Club as a fan, you take your phone with you, of course, because they used to try to stop that, but you can't do that anymore. You can take any video clip you want. You can post it to your social accounts. You can have all the fun you want. But if you're wearing a media credential, you have already signed off on a form that says the tour owns anything you capture, and you can't post any of that stuff of actual players or actual competition. You can't post any of that to your accounts. In other words, we don't want the exposure you might provide. We want only the exposure we have orchestrated, and people can kind of see through that. And it's just silly the way that they've done it. So again, LPGA is so much more enjoyable to work with. With your permission, or even without your permission, I'm going to jump in here for just a quick moment and interrupt my conversation with Art Lewis to bring into the storyline another key figure from the early days of Michigan Golf Live. When we launched the radio show 25 years ago, Jon Bloom was a key part of that effort. Back in that day, he was working in Detroit radio and has since gone on to become the radio play-by-play voice for the Phoenix Suns. Bloomer and I have remained friends all these years, and it's really a cool part of our history to hear how he and I came together and then kind of poured ourselves into getting the radio show off the ground. Here's Jon Bloom. Anytime I reflect on the origin days of Michigan Golf Live, I have to get in touch with my buddy Jon Bloom, who for at least a few seasons would make the drive from Detroit to my home studio, which was about, I don't know, Bloomer, an hour and 45 minutes away in the dark of the early morning hours at, I don't know, 4 or 5 a.m. I don't know why you did it, but I'm glad you did. And now, we look at Bloomer now, he's the voice of the Phoenix Suns. It's so fun to see how your career has moved along. Let's go back though and fill in some of the origin story blanks on Michigan Golf Live's early days, including your memories of how you and I ever even met.
Yeah, Absolutely. And this is exciting and fun for me, Bill, because, while you've continued to broadcast all over the Midwest, and to everybody who is smart enough to listen whenever they have a chance to improve their golf game or just be entertained, because you do it as good as anybody does. And I'm not just saying that to razz you up, because you asked me to join you in this venture years and years ago. It's just the truth. And so I remember when I first got to Detroit, I had graduated Syracuse, it was 97, in the midst of the absolute heyday of Hockey Town and the Red Wings winning cups, Barry Sanders and the Lions, the Tigers being a dumpster fire and getting ready to finish off Tiger Stadium. And the Pistons were kind of just middling. They just were not in a great place. Your Michigan Wolverines were destined for the Rose Bowl to win a national championship. This was painting the picture of when I entered Michigan for the first time in my life to take my first job in radio with Sports Radio 1130 The Fan in Detroit. And at that point in time, I had no clue how in love with this sport of golf the people of not just Detroit, but Michigan in general were, and still are, obviously. And I quickly found out, to the point where I begged the program director at the time, who was named Gregg Henson. You may recall he had a show of his own, the Jamie and Gregg Show, very popular show. Rest in peace, Jamie Samuelson. Every time I get a chance to mention that man, I like to. He was an amazing individual, great broadcaster, even better person, and we miss him. We miss him direly. But on Gregg Henson's part, he hates golf, still hates golf. And I begged, hey, can we get a golf show in here? This is an all sports radio station in a golf hotbed. Let's talk some golf. And it took months and months. And finally, he's like, all right, Bloomer, I'm going to let you have a show. It's going to be Saturday mornings from 6 to 7 a.m. And I said, okay, I'm in, 6 to 7 a.m. So when you mentioned, Bill, that I got up at 4 or 4:30 or 5 to drive to Millington, which I believe was the mailing address, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, back in the early days, lived on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere and broadcast from a studio that was built into my home. Crazy.
Yes, and it was
this
awesome.
By the way, this is back before podcasts. This is back before smartphones. This is back before websites really were very commonly associated with programs. We were doing live radio. I mean, like the live kind of radio that is not done as much anymore. We had a tie line. That's the name of the piece of equipment that we would use from my studio to dial into a distribution hub in Columbus, Ohio.
Ohio. I remember it being Ohio. Yep.
Radio Sound Network. And that facility would then send the signal up to all of the MGL radio affiliates around the state, of which at that time there were 7 or 8. And it was a technological tightrope walk every single week, because it didn't really take much to go wrong. It was all analog. It was all phone lines. And if something went wrong, you were just dead. You just had dead air. And you would drive. This is before we started to take the show out onto the road every week. Now,
right.
For the last 20 years, I don't do any shows from a studio. We do them on location at different resorts and destinations. But back then, Bloomer is pumping some coffee in. This is pre-Red Bull. This is pumping the coffee in. This is driving up to Millington at dark 4:30. And if I was there, we'd do it together. Or if I was out on location, you'd be back in the studio to handle all the connections and all that stuff. I don't know what I paid you, but it wasn't nearly enough to do what you did.
Hey, listen, for me at that point in time, all things considered, it was probably my best gig, because I got paid with what I love. I got to go play golf with you and get to have these experiences, which was fantastic, and playing a whole bunch of outings. But I want to rewind the tape a little bit back to when all this stuff started, because we didn't connect the dots. I was doing the first tee, as we called it. That was before the first tee organization had even been built. So I thought I was all creative, 6 a.m. in the morning. It's got to be the first tee. That's a brilliant name. So I have not taken my royalties since they've started the organization, based on my trademarking and patenting mishaps. Yeah. So then you and I meet at a Buick Open Media Day. And that's when kind of this all started germinating, because we were sharing not just a really fun round of golf and outing at Warwick Hills, which was such a fun place, and I had no idea all the memories that I would end up having there in the coming years after this initial meeting with you. But I know we shared a common foe on the golf course that I quickly understood, like, how these events would go, and there would normally be a similar name would make his way to the top of almost all the leaderboards. And so that initially bonded us, because we have even though Bill is just such a calm, like, generous, kind-hearted soul, he does have a little competitive fire in him. I don't know if you know this about him. There's a little competitive fire at Bill Hobson, and I love that part of you, Bill, because there's a little bit more than a little of fire inside me, and I certainly have let it out over the years with you. But in this case, we got to share having a common foe, and I think it initially forged this bond. I was so excited to hear about the possibility of joining forces with you, not just because I felt like it was going to expand my horizons of what I was doing, but look, the idea of driving a couple hours through, and by the way, there was some crazy fog that would develop over some of the little ponds and lakes on the way to Millington. I would have a lot of fun, and sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes there wouldn't be any sleep at all for your boy on his way to your studio. I would have been out, because consider, I was 25 years old. I wasn't necessarily singling and mingling, but I was not necessarily married yet, and we were having some fun in our young 20s with my wife. She was in the picture, but we had a group of friends. We would go out, and sometimes I'd be like, guys, I got a golf show in the morning. This is the threshold. I'm either going home now and getting 3 hours of sleep, or let's just run it, and I'll leave straight from here and I'll go to Bill's studio.
Well, okay, so let me back up. First of all, to paint the picture of what media days used to be like. When a PGA Tour or an LPGA event comes into town, about 3 weeks to a month prior, they would have a media day where there would be a press conference featuring the corporate sponsor and the club leadership, and they would basically hype up ticket sales for the event about a month out. And as part of that day, you would be well fed, and then you'd get to go play the golf course. And in those earlier stages of this show, which turned out to be kind of the final decade of the Buick Open, the Buick Open Media Day was also a very loosely run competition. There would be like pro shop gift certificates for the winners, but they would not vet anybody's handicap. You would just give them a handicap when you registered for it. You could tell them whatever you wanted to. Well, I just gave them my number. Back then, I don't know what it was, but it was probably 9 or 10 or something. I don't even know.
Yep.
And every year, I don't mean a few years, I mean all of the years, all of the media days were won by the same individual, who, by the way, is still active in the media. And it was a foregone conclusion when you pulled into the parking lot at Warwick Hills. You already knew who was going to win the event. And we began to call it, using that person's last name, if it was Bloomer, which it wasn't, it would be like the Bloom Invitational. And we were all just
got a nice ring to it.
Yeah, so all just part of this guy's day as we were all coming through. And then on those rare occasions where you would, because Warwick Hills is an old school design where the nines kind of parallel each other. So you can see a lot of golf while you're on the course. And every once in a while, you'd look over at this guy's group and you'd see him hit a shot, a grounder or some sort of a hosel rocket. And then later on, he's turning in a net 61. And you're like, what's going on out here? And so that's really what kind of bonded Bloomer and myself together. I should also point out that when he mentions the fan, WDFN, 11:30 a.m. in Detroit, at that time, it was the only sports talk show in that town. In a major market, they had the run of the shop. That's changed in the years since, because a competing company got smart enough to put sports talk on the FM and then went and bid for a lot of live play-by-play rights back when people wanted to listen to more Detroit teams than just the Lions. And but in those days, Bloomer, I mean, that was the place to be. That was the lineup, and you were and still are the guy who would do anything that was asked of him to be an incredibly reliable team player, but B, because I think you realized then, and you still do all the way up till now when you got this gig as the voice of the Suns, that reps count. Reps matter. You know, Gladwell says 10,000 hours. He's not kidding.
No.
It takes reps to get your skills honed, to find your own voice, to where you're not just imitating somebody else's voice, and all of those things to let your own personality come out. And so way back when we were doing the show, we were both still finding what that sounded like and what that was going to end up being like. And I think now that we've both arrived at not just our voices, but I try not to be a whole lot different on the air than I am in real life. And I know you're like that too, but it wasn't like that at the beginning. We're always trying to figure out how all this works together. And for some reason, the Lord blessed me with a partner who was just ready to fit right in like a glove, and tirelessly help grow the pirate ship. I remember doing some Buick Open special shows. I remember one time we were set up out on the patio of what then was a VIP chalet. They've changed a lot over the years since then, of course, but back then it was kind of a cutting edge thing. And I remember Fred Funk walking by our location. This would never happen on today's PGA Tour. We would all be tasered and dragged out by our feet if we attempted this. But as he walked by, I think you went over to him and said, "Would you mind joining us for a couple moments on our show?" And this guy comes up, plops down, doesn't know either one of us from Adam, and spends, I don't know how much time, but a lot of time just talking to him.
Awesome.
And it was one of those moments like, I think this might work. I mean, this is kind of fun. It's not just the two of us talking about destinations or news, but I think this could work. And here we are 25 years later, and it still works because it's all part of storytelling. And I don't think we would be at this place had you and I not been able to kind of get it off the ground.
No, dude, I'm having so many great memories kind of flash through my head as you're talking, Bill, because you taught me so much about enabling people to tell their stories, and even people who are the most uncomfortable people on a microphone that you can imagine. And a lot of those people happen to find themselves into the golf industry somehow. but you get into these places and you meet these general managers and these head professionals, and I watched you work, and I learned so much from your approach to these folks, because I've had to deal with that all through my career as a reporter, as a host, as a broadcast play-by-play guy, whatever it happens to be. A lot of times you're going to be in a situation where the person that you're with, whether it's you're interviewing them, whether they're your partner at the time, whatever it happens to be, they're just not comfortable. And you happen to have that comfort level. And it took a while for me to create that comfort level, especially on camera. That's where you really taught me a ton. You were so smooth and comfortable on the camera as if it wasn't there. So I kind of tried to feel like it wasn't there because I didn't have those reps. When you talk about reps, I had a lot more radio reps, still do, than I have TV reps. But when I have done TV, I credit Bill a ton with getting me to be comfortable. Yeah, I went through, classes for it at Syracuse, and I interned at TV stations, and I done on-air work, but it's not the same when you don't do it for a living, and you don't get a ton of reps. And I started getting reps, and then, of course, I make a trip to Costa Rica without my partner. Bill doesn't even go, and we film a half-hour TV show with Gregg and the crew. And I wanted to touch on that too, because the crew that you put together, the team you had, I don't want to take all the credit. It's the fact that we came together when we did, and people were in on it, not looking for a big paycheck. We all kind of wanted to have the experience. And sometimes when you're building something, that's what it takes. It takes that people are on the same page with a common kind of goal. It's not that we're all in it to get rich. And a lot of businesses are built with that really the sole purpose. That had nothing to do with this. We were in love with the sport of golf. We wanted to share that love with the people of Michigan and around the Midwest who we knew loved the sport because we saw it with our own eyes and our ears. We heard it whenever we talked to them and whenever they would open up and share those stories that Bill would be so great at getting out of them. And then I just try to be the goofball. And that's the other thing I picked up from you is Bill's a little goofy too. He's goofy in a different way than me, but he's got a great sense of humor. And whenever we finally did get out on the road or playgrounds of golf or travel, I think, there was a lot of moments where I felt like, wow, this is great off the air. It's got to be great on the air. And and eventually we did kind of take those personalities that we both were creating ourselves and brought it on the air. And I love doing it. I absolutely, that's why I got up to drive the couple hours every Saturday, or stayed up all night and pulled the all-nighter to do it. It wasn't, because of the money or anything like that. It was just so much fun.
I was just having a conversation 2 weeks ago with a young man from my church. He comes up to me after the service is over. I've never met him before. He's 19. He's got a YouTube channel that has like 50,000 subscribers to it, which makes me very jealous. And it's all about golf, but it's just he and his buddy. And basically it looks kind of like they're just out with their iPhones, just taking pictures of each other hitting shots and then making comments to the beverage cart girl. I mean, it was just really weird stuff, but maybe it's a different generation. But anyways, he says to me, how do we kind of break through to the next level? And I said, well, how long have you been at it? He goes, oh, we started the channel about 6 months ago. And we really want to get free golf. And I said, well, how many reps, how many hours would you say you've got into this? He's like, well, make an hour a week or 2 hours a week, maybe. I said, okay. First of all, you get in touch with me when you've got about 10,000 hours in, and you've finally figured out what this looks like, because it's not just about free golf. And you and I both in those early days would have been pretty darn happy, content with just invitations to play wherever we wanted to go and play. I remember when I started the radio show, I asked my wife beforehand what she thought, and she said, I have 2 questions. Do you think you'll get to play a lot of golf for free? And do you think we'll go broke? And that was it, and I said, well, I'm pretty sure the golf thing will happen. I don't think we'll go broke. I have an idea on maybe how this can grow. And back then I had TV kind of off in my distant thoughts, but it's funny. It's not just about the transactional nature of all of this. It's about the relational nature. You've built that over the years everywhere you have gone, which is why so many people still call Bloomer their friends in Detroit, even though he hasn't lived here for 20 years. And where we go now, I like to think that a lot of the destinations that we broadcast from, both on radio and TV, I think they've become friends over the years. When somebody leaves or loses their job, I send them a note. I feel it. It's more than just the invoice being sent. But over all this time, if I have asked you to share your story, that's because I care about your story. Well, that doesn't just stop if we don't do business together, right? So that's got to continue. And here, Bloomer, you and I have not really done a broadcast together in a couple of decades, and yet we still have this friendship that will go until the end of time, because we care about each other's story. And that's kind of, to me, that's why we do this, and that's why you do what you do down there.
Yeah, and I think it's great because I remember when we would go out and meet with different courses or course operators or resorts, and we would share the story of Michigan Golf Live. And obviously the goal at that time was to really, get another partnership lined up. And we would look to, whether we were going to the golf show or the expo center to make our way from tent to tent. I remember those days as well. And sometimes we would be seeing familiar faces where we'd already done shows, and they would be like, hey guys, the MGL guys, and they would want us back and immediately sign up for the next year. Well, that told me all I needed to know. Okay. When I saw the response that Bill would get from, people that had only done the show once or twice, because again, I joined pretty early in the days of MGL, and how they would react. And then not just from the standpoint of maybe they felt like they got the bang for their buck, because that's a lot of things when it comes to sales, is we feel we have to have the value. but I think it was the relationship, and it was the fact that they felt so special that they were able to share their story in the way that you gave them the opportunity to do so, Bill. It's the truth. It's the platform for it. And part of that is the way you built the show. We weren't really rigid with like having certain elements have to be in certain places through the couple of hours that we were on the air. So if a guy was available at the beginning of the show to join us and talk about his story, then that's what we're going to do. And I think your flexibility is big, and that's a message. I think if you're young and you want to get into broadcasting and you're listening to this, take that. It's not just the hours and the reps, but it's doing those hours and reps with purpose and understanding what works and what doesn't work. And I think you had a really good feel for that when it comes to just making people comfortable. And that's the best way I can put it.
Yeah.
Making people comfortable, making the listener comfortable at home, or whether they're driving a truck or whether they happen to be tuning in, and making the people that we're broadcasting with oftentimes the most, again, I want to stress this. For some reason, golf course operators might be the most awkward humans, okay? I know Bill's laughing, but I know he knows I'm not lying with this.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate the investment they've made. I find the same thing often similar with superintendents. These guys have a skill set and a work ethic that I am extremely jealous of, but in front of a microphone, it's not always a very good fit. I can remember talking with one of the best known superintendents in the entire Midwest, and I won't give his name here because you'll see why. I was leading into a question about how he does what he does, but I asked it probably in too flowery. It just took me forever to ask the question. And by the time I got to the actual, so how do you do it? He looks at me and he goes, "What now?" And I said, he wasn't paying the least bit of attention throughout all of that. And there is a responsibility on the part of the host, whether it's me doing what we do here, or whether it's you doing the pregame show with the Suns or whatever it is. There's a responsibility on the host to get to the comfort level of the person you're interviewing. I kind of like to say that Michigan Golf Live just sounds kind of weird. We're not really a show about golf. We're a show about people who enjoy golf. And the more that we can tell those stories to them, the better the feedback and the better the stories are going to be coming out on the other end. So that's kind of where we go with all those interview moments. And I've got to run a moment by you, Bloomer, and see how well you remember this moment. This had no microphones. This had no cameras. We were just out playing golf at a course. I believe it was Moose Ridge.
Yeah.
Which is in the, for those
South Lyon
elsewhere, it's the South Lyon, sort of an hour outside of Detroit area. And we were paired with just a random guys. There's three of us. We didn't know this other gentleman. And Bloomer has got I think a 3-wood in his hands or he's going big. He takes the full on swing, just flushes this ball. And about 6.5 seconds later, like a beanbag dropped from the heavens, falls a robin, just as dead as a doorknob. I mean, and somehow, in the infinite possibilities of the universe, Bloomer's rocket takes out this bird, and we are unable to stand upright. I am doubled over. I'm dead. I am crying. I'm laughing so hard. Bloomer is just dying laughing. And this guy that we were paired with was aghast at our insensitivity to the loss of this precious creature. And Bloomer, I don't know how well you remember that moment, but whenever I think of playing golf with Bloomer, I have that moment and one other that I'll share in a moment. Do you remember?
I'm a little concerned. I'm concerned about the second moment, but at the same time, I do remember it vaguely. One of my better birdies, and at the same time, I was somewhat surprised at the reaction of our playing partner, because you and I had a similar response. Was that pre-Randy Johnson hitting the bird off the mound? I think I did it first.
Yeah, I think you were first, and clearly you did it on purpose. That's why this gentleman was so offended, because
I'm just that good. I mean,
precision.
you see me. I don't use a gun in skeet shooting. I just tee up a ball and a 3-wood, and I pull, and I'm that accurate.
The other moment that I think of pretty quickly is we're playing at Oakhurst with your friend and now my friend Aaron Oberholzer,
Yes.
Golf Channel, who was playing on the PGA Tour at the time. I was playing like a beginner that day. It was horrible. I was probably trying to impress the tour pro. I don't even know, but I was terrible. And Bloomer holes out from a million miles away from the woods, out of the rough, holes out. I just cans it. And for that one moment in time, won the hole from the guy who was about to play at the Buick Open. And anytime I connect with Oberholzer, we revisit that moment. And
Yes, me too. Except I connect with him a little more often, so I can't do it every time.
right.
But I do like to fold it in because I stole the tee. He was actually playing great. I think he birdied maybe 3 holes in a row, including that hole. But I pulled out for the deuce. It was an eagle on the par 4-6 at Oakhurst, which is I think a 460 yard hole from where we were playing. I had about a $160 out of the rough, and I looked at him and I'm like, "This is going to be a flyer, isn't it?" And he's like, "Yeah, I think it will be." So I clubbed down, hit a little less club, and there was a group up by the green. They started yelling. We didn't see it go in, and when they started yelling, I'm like, "What? Really? That went? Yeah, let's go." I think I consider that my best shot. I do have one hole in one in my life, and that was at Tanglewood. So apparently, I love South Lyon courses. That's where I hit kill birds and also make my only hole in one. And that was not nearly as good of a shot. That was lucky. This one was one of my finest moments on a golf course, and just the company, having you and Aaron there was what made it so good.
Oh man, Bloomer, we could go on for a long time. Thank you for being part of the formative years of this show, and we're proud to see where you are now, man. Keep it going, and we will connect hopefully on green grass next summer.
Oh, I can't wait to do it. I can't wait to play golf with you. Michigan Golf Live fans, if you're listening and you come out to Arizona and you're at a Suns game, come find me. Maybe we'll get around to golfing out here in the desert. And then in the summer times, the plan is always come back to the great state of Michigan. You know, we eventually find our way back there, and hopefully we will do so for more extended periods of time over the course of the years. And we'll continue going down memory lane. Keep MGL going, Bill. It's needed out there. I know the golf fans of the Midwest, not just Michigan, of all over the Midwest, have a connection with this show just like I do. And thanks for bringing me down memory lane today.
I almost forgot. You've got a prop next to you in your Zoom window. For those who are watching the video version of this, hold that flag up. You want to see the evolution of branding. This is logo from year one, made in some sort of software program that thankfully went away many years ago, but this was the script: red, green, blue MGL logo that yours truly just carved out of some bizarre Windows 1 program.
Hey, I've kept it in pretty good shape, my man.
It looks pretty good. You might want to get that right over to the new Hall of Fame location at Pinehurst. They won't want it, but try to hide it in there somewhere so I can say we have something in the World Golf Hall of Fame.
How'd you like my prop work with the duct tape? Didn't that go pretty well?
It's pretty good. I mean, you talk about resourceful. If it wasn't play-by-play for you, it would be astronaut, I'm sure.
Exactly.
Thanks,
Definitely
buddy.
that's the next logical step. Well, I honestly feel like Michigan Golf Live is a big reason why I have had any success in broadcasting. And it's not blowing smoke. It's because of those hours of time spent and doing different things and trying to be comfortable when I wasn't necessarily comfortable, and helping other people do the same. And it is all skills that can help in so many different ways, not just broadcasting. Patience is a dad of 2 teenage daughters. That helps in that realm as well sometimes.
Our new motto: making people uncomfortable for a quarter century. There you go.
No, you're making them comfortable. You're taking them from uncomfortable to comfortable. You know, don't flip it.
I love it. Hey, thanks, buddy. Much appreciated.
Thanks, Billy. Be good. My best to the family.
Hey, before we completely leave behind the radio chapter of Michigan Golf Live's history, just one more note of thanks to a very important person. That'd be my dad. In each home that I have lived in, he has actually built for me a broadcast studio. It's really quite remarkable. He's got an amazing set of skills, and even though he doesn't really know the technical nuances of what broadcasting entails, at every step of the way he has been one of the best cheerleaders for what we're doing. So I just want to take a moment to say thank you for all the hard work. I don't possess any of those skills. I can talk, but you don't want me with a hammer in my hands. And he's got that ability, and it's truly a gift from above. So thank you, Dad, for all of that hard work. Now let's resume the conversation I was having with Art Lewis, leading us now from the radio chapter of Michigan Golf Live into the launch of our TV program.
You started out in radio. When did you decide that you needed to put a picture with it?
About 5 years in. So our TV show is coming up on its 20th year. Again, let's think about the different landscape that long ago. We had in the Detroit or in the Michigan region, we had like Pass. That was the network that the Tigers were on. It was Pass out of Detroit. It later became Fox Sports Detroit, which is now Bally Sports Detroit. But that was the original iteration of it. But there wasn't really an all-pervasive outlet for local programming unless you wanted to be on PBS. And one of the guys who was so kind to me, who had a show on PBS for a couple decades, Larry Adderley, since has passed away. He spent a lot of time talking with me about how you can put these things together. I didn't really have the desire to go the PBS route because I wanted to have it be a bit more commercially supported. But we started thinking about how fun would it be to take a half-hour program and start featuring destinations, both in Michigan and then all over the place, all over the country, all over the world. And so we had our first couple of shoots. I was just looking back through some pictures and talking with our production director. One of our first shows ever was in New Mexico, in Albuquerque. And when you go back and look at the video clips from that show, there was no such thing as high def. It looks like we shot those things on a 7th generation VHS tape that had the wrinkles in it, that had all the funky colors. But at the time, Art, we felt like we were, Brent Musburger at CBS in the network booth. It was the coolest thing ever. We didn't have drones then. We used a helicopter. We were terrified. We were leaning out the passenger door of a helicopter to shoot aerial footage, but at the time, it was all that was possible. Nobody else was doing it. And it started to kind of open some doors for us when other destinations started to see, hey, there's some cool things happening with this little group out of Michigan. When I hear myself say the phrase, that little group out of Michigan, I'm reminded of how our television journey actually started. And that was really on a wing and a prayer. We really had no idea if anybody would watch a show that we would put together. But fortunately, I was blessed by getting to know and working alongside a young man with a sincere and serious dedication to producing quality video content. He has been responsible for capturing basically every swing I have made on camera at every destination and editing every one of our television shows over all these years. So I take this moment to interrupt my conversation with Art Lewis to introduce all of you to our director of production for the show, Gregg Hall, and hear his stories from the other side of the lens. Well, there really is no way to tell the story of Michigan Golf Live without including our director of production since day one when we did television, Gregg Hall. When I say 25 years to you, what first comes to mind?
I can't believe it's been that long. We just started, didn't we?
I know. Yes, we were both kids. You were. Well, often when we're out on shoots, people will come up and ask us various questions, and one of them is almost always, how did all this come about, or how did it start, or where did it all come together? And they'll ask, where did you guys first meet? So the answer to that question, because Gregg has captured on video every swing I've made for the TV show and edited every show we've ever done, which I don't know how you're still upright after all that. But we actually met back when you were a teenager, right?
Yeah.
So why don't
Yeah.
you fill in the blanks?
Yeah. So we, as they see, let me get this straight. So I always wanted to be in television from grade school, and so I went to a local television station. They kind of some of the engineers took me under the wings and taught me all the basics of how broadcast works. I met you there at the TV station, and then as I learned my skills and from there, and you wanted to do a TV show, that's when I said, yeah, I says, I think we can easily make this happen.
Yeah, and just to kind of color that in a little bit more, I was working at the TV station when Gregg, as part of an explorer troop, which is sort of like, I guess, Boy Scouts, would come
Yeah.
in maybe every other week. I'm not sure. And you were earning, or you were at least investigating and learning all these engineering and broadcast related little bits of knowledge, and you just never left, right?
Yeah, it's a great story. I don't want to get too much into, it's all about me since this is about MGL, but yeah, years back, it was before I could even drive. So my parents would drop me off. This was it's called the Explorers Group, which was an older Boy Scout. So this is the next level if you continued on. And the idea is to learn a skill trade. And in this skill trade would be broadcasting. I would come in every other week, and then we would sit down and we would learn the equipment. Eventually, what happened is that that class would dwindle down as the students would, they do what they need to do and they're gone. Yeah, I stuck around and I wanted to do more and I want to do more. And it got to one point where the engineers or the staff, knowing that I can drive, would come over to the house during the summertime, pick me up, go and take me somewhere. We would do that job. They would come back, drop me off, and then they would go back to work. My parents were full. They're like on board. They're like, this is great. He is learning everything about broadcasting and we don't have to pay anybody. They're just doing it. And so when I went through grade school and when I started being able to drive, I actually came in and started doing a temporary help at first, and then I became temporary to part-time, still in school, still in high school at this
Still
point.
violating all the child labor laws known to man.
There may be some child labor laws in there, but I would say again, my parents were like very on board.
Okay, so there were times, I just want everybody to understand this, and it's not this way anymore at all in any broadcast stations, but back in the day, when everything was analog and you were using actual tapes and it was, commercials and programs were often triggered literally by hand, by hitting a button, watching a clock. There were times when Gregg, as a teenager before getting driver's license, was the only human being in the station running what really was a multi-million-dollar broadcast entity by himself, like on the weekends in a room called Master Control. So to say that you were a pretty observant student and earned the trust of everybody, I think is borne out by the fact that they just left you to your own, just kind of left you sitting in the building by yourself for 12 hours at a time.
I still remember my dad when he picked me up and there's nobody in the parking lot. And my dad goes, "Who's in the building?" I'm like, "No one, just me." And my dad was just like, "I don't get, how do they just let a teenager just run around a station?" He goes, "It's got expensive equipment." I'm like, "Oh yeah."
Yeah. Fair question. Very fair question. And so I was working at the station at the time. We won't name the station because we don't want to get anybody in trouble, but I was working there at the time as well. And that's where Gregg and I first connected. But this is far before Michigan Golf Live was even a glint in anybody's eye. But over a number of years, as Gregg began to develop, he got out of the master control room. He moved into production and started to learn all the intricacies of shooting video, editing, and how cameras literally work, like the hardware side of things from an engineering perspective. And even though we have long since lost the two engineers that were a part of that educational process, I'm thankful for them to this day because you have had to fix things that I've broken so many times. And I think they were a part of that instruction. So to John Grover and John Proctor and their families, thank you for taking the time to mentor a young guy who showed a passion for all things production and engineering, the passion that he still has to this day. I don't know, Gregg, if you are where you are today without those two guys.
It wouldn't be. And the funny thing is, since you mentioned them, they you got to remember when I got into that program, you had to be in high school, but I wasn't. I was in grade school, and I lied about my age to get in. So that was another thing. So if we talk about and then of course I tried at some point I had to explain to him that I haven't gone through high school in 6 years. It didn't take 6 years to go through high school. So I had to finally fess up to him. I was like, I lied. And I remember Grover's exact words was, yeah, we know. And I was just like, and he's like, yeah. He goes, you were passionate, you know exactly what I'm gonna do. He says, not every student in here that came and wanted, had the drive that you wanted. He says, we're not gonna say no to that. And I like I said, so yeah, thank them. My whole career sits on the generosity of those two gentlemen.
Oh, that's really cool. Do you have any recollection of when I first talked with you about doing a television show about golf destinations? I really don't remember the conversation, but obviously it took place within the walls of the TV station.
Yeah, if I recall, you were dabbling in the radio, if I recall, and it does go back to even Summer Swing, Michigan Summer Swing.
Yeah.
So there was times we did that, but I remember you were dabbling in radio, and then you made a comment about, I think we can do this in TV, and I says, yeah, I can. Now, it's still back then. Cameras were expensive. I mean, we're talking editing equipment, cameras. We're talking 30,000 plus.
Yeah.
And I just knew that at that time we could actually. I thought about it, I was like, yeah, well, I think we can do this cheaper, and we don't need to buy the most expensive equipment, which is kind of funny because now that's like today's thing.
Yeah.
I mean, people's got their phones and they're doing live streams and they're doing it on the cheap. That was not a case. You could not do that without some type of knowledge. And so we would actually, the goal was to use more inexpensive equipment, but fake it in a sense. And that's what we kind of did at first.
Do you remember where we went first? Was our first shoot in Albuquerque?
First shoot was Albuquerque. We shot on and I still remember the camera. We shot on something it was called the Canon GL1, little palm camera.
Yeah.
So it wasn't like we showed up looking like we're professionals, but the video was spectacular. Shot on tape. We posted it on something called, at the time, people now use it every day, but back then it was not even known. It was called Premiere, the Adobe Premiere. But this was the days before it was called Premiere Pro. It was actually just Premiere. It was a really basic, watered down program, what it is now today. And which is kind of shows, like I said, how technology has grown. But yeah, we were on the road. It was something called the Santa Fe Trail.
Yeah, Golf on the Santa Fe Trail. In fact, I recently went back to their website to look at maybe how it has grown over the years and to talk with them perhaps about a return trip. And the website that I just saw just now is the same one I saw 20 something years ago, which means I don't think the Santa Fe Trail is doing very well as a marketing group because
with the construction sign still on there saying
under construction. Pretty much. I mean, you talk about making it out of Microsoft front page. That thing is a disaster right now. But yeah, that's where we went first, and we felt like, hey, this is pretty big time stuff. Now, you all should know, Gregg keeps everything. He's got that show, and recently sent me some of it, and it is stunningly hard to watch, both from the talent perspective, which would be yours truly, and then just from the difference in between HD and where we were back then. But at the time, of course, we all thought that this was cutting edge, state of the art. It's like, it reminds me of when I watch old highlights of Barry Sanders running. He's as good as ever, but the presentation is brutal. It's just really, really bad. Well, here we are, fast forwarding now a couple decades later, and you're not using tape anymore, and everything has gone digital, and the quality of it all is so much better. But I do remember there was a breakthrough moment for our presentation that actually got its start in the parking lot of a golf course in the thumb of Michigan, where there happened to be a helicopter parked. And it turns out that there was a gentleman there playing golf that day, a farmer named Doug, who had when I say a tiny helicopter, I mean a tiny helicopter. If you watched MASH, you know what the bubble helicopter is, the cockpit. Gregg, why don't you take it from here and how our world changed with the death-defying adventures of shooting from the helicopter?
Coming from my fear of flying and mixing that with, yeah, we can do that, and we'll just take the door off and we'll just hang you out the window, and
We
you
know.
hold it, and you can't hold on to something because you're holding on to a camera. These are days way before there was a drone available. So again, this is nowadays it seems to be a common practice. But yeah, Doug would show up in this bubble helicopter that literally could park itself in the back of my truck.
Yep.
Really small. And I just remember when I brought the camera, I brought the battery, and the camera wasn't big at the time. Brought the camera, battery. If we were traveling, possibly a tripod inside, if we could put it somewhere. There was no room. The batteries there's no room. I had to put the batteries underneath the seat. So once I sat down, I could not get back to the battery. I can't explain how small this was.
But you leave the door on the ground.
Right. I think there was more room in a Volkswagen Beetle than there was in this. But yeah, and he would take the door off, and then he would fly us around. And I remember during that time, that was the first time I get it. You always think about when you're up in the air, you can see everything, and you can, but you get a sense of you lose where you're at in the course. And I just remember saying, okay, where is hole one? And then as we do, we're like, okay, here's hole one. This must be hole two. And then once in a while, you'll get a golf course that kind of throws you off, where they'll have two tee boxes side by side, and you're like, is that three? Is that four? And so yeah, we would just fly around and just get all 18 holes in one take. And like I said, it's a lot different nowadays. I can tell you that. Yeah.
I remember there was one time when you were not able to be there, so I decided I would go up and shoot with Doug. And as we were getting strapped in, I said to him, hey, is there like a weight limit on this chopper? And his answer was, we'll see.
We'll see. Yes.
That was not the answer that I was looking for. And this chopper was small enough that instead of, like you see in the movies where the chopper just goes straight up, I mean, it could have somebody hanging off of the runners. It doesn't matter. It's going straight up and it's moving. Doug's chopper is a move forward at a very low height to build up some speed and to get some lift. And in the case of the first flight he and I took together, our we'll see moment was flying towards a stand of pine trees, which I was just seeing come directly close up to me and lifted up at the last moment second. Yeah. And I don't know if he was doing that for effect or not, but I also remember asking him when we were up there, I said, hey, by the way, just, not that I'm trying to put any negative thoughts in anybody's mind, but what happens if the engines die and the rotor just stops turning? And his answer was, we'll glide down gently. In that point, I thought, oh, I'm not believing anything else that I'm told the rest of this. There's no way we're going to glide down gently. And he tried to explain to me the aerodynamics of all that, and I still wasn't buying it. However, there was a time when Gregg got to experience firsthand the gentle gliding down. I'll set the scene for what was happening, and then you could take us into the moment. We were doing the radio show live on a Saturday morning on the west side of Michigan at Gull Lake View Golf Resort. While I was on the air on Saturday morning, it was a beautiful day, so we decided to make the most out of those 2.5 to 3 hours that I was tied up by having Gregg and Doug capture the aerial footage. They had 4 golf courses at that time, 3 or 4 at that time. So I'm on the radio, they're up in the air. And they're not terribly far away, so you can usually off in the distance hear the sound of a chopper, not necessarily that loud, but you can kind of tell when they're up there, especially if you're listening for it. And then we got to a commercial break, and I took my headsets off, and I realized that I didn't hear the chopper. I'm like, oh, maybe they went to get some fuel. There's no way they're done yet. It was only like the first half hour or so. And imagine my surprise to see Gregg come walking by my broadcast location looking a little peaked, I must say. Why was that?
It was very windy that day. Well, let's start with that as a placement. And we were flying just above tree line, and we were doing really well. And at one point, of course, we started going with the wind. And for some reason, when that wind came up with a gust, and at some point, the winds was about the same speed as we were traveling, and we lost lift, and we just started coming down. And there's no one around us, so the golf course was pretty much empty. It was still early in the morning, and we came down. Thank goodness we came down below the tree line, near a fairway or over a fairway, and we just kind of like came down. We hit the fairway, and we just shot right back up.
You bounced off the fairway.
We bounced off the fairway and came right back up. So we got below the tree line where the winds kind of was not as bad, and we went right back up. And I was like, oh. Okay. And I just remember Doug just saying, he goes, hold on. And I was just like, yeah, I mean, where we're going. I mean, there's nowhere to hold on to. And we bounced and went back up. It happened so fast. And I just remember when we got back up there, I was like congratulating him. I'm like, great job. He kept it perfectly straight, never hit the back of the tail. I was just congratulating him left and right, saying, dude, that was great flying. And he's like, it was out of my control. He's at that point, but he leans over, he goes, even though we got headphones on, he leans over and he goes, how about we go a little higher this time?
Well, the good thing about Doug is he never panicked. He was as smooth.
He's smooth. He never panicked.
When you came walking by my broadcast table, I said, hey, what, are you guys all done? And you just said, we bounced. I'm like, I don't know what that means. He goes, well, I was in the air and then we bounced off the fairway. And I was like, oh, that can't be good. And I don't think you were really excited about going back up in the choppers, which means as we talk about the evolution of the show, we were both overjoyed with the innovation of the drones. Yeah. And we had the very first Phantom from DJI. Our very first place to use it was at Pilgrim's Run, north of Grand Rapids on the west side of Michigan. And the very first moment that we decided to use it, now let's set the scene a little bit. The early iterations of those drones, nothing like what we have now. No monitor. You would attach a GoPro camera to the bottom of it. You would shoot upside down and then flip the footage later in post. You didn't know what you were shooting. You didn't have any sort of a gimbal that would smooth out the footage. All these things that are commonplace now, you don't have any of it, but we still felt kind of like we were on the set of Star Trek or something. We were space age with this little drone. People would crowd around to see this little spaceship kind of a thing. And the first flight that we ever took was by Gregg, and he took it straight up, maybe 20, 30 feet, and then just brought it right straight down.
You're going down.
And I'm standing right there. I'm like, what are we doing here? And we were all nervous to use it. There's a couple grand at the time, and those early ones, you had to buy 1 million batteries because the batteries only lasted about 12 minutes. And I said, hey, I didn't buy this thing for it to be a ladder. So give me that. You guys, he and Dave, the other gentleman on our crew, I said, you guys go shoot ground footage. I'll take care of the aerials. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
So at Pilgrim's Run, they assigned to me a ranger who is still there and is still telling the story. And we drive out to one of the long par 4 holes that is surrounded by pine trees all the way down. And because I have this guy as my audience, I'm being an idiot. And I'm acting as if I have thousands of flight hours on this thing. I can do anything I want. I have never flown it at all. It's like fresh out of the wrapper. Take it up in the air, hit record on the GoPro, take it up in the air and slowly start taking it down the fairway. Well, this thing, by the time it gets, 150, 200 yards away, it's just a little tiny white dot on the horizon. There's no visual anything other than I think that's where it is. And he says to me, hey, by the way, what happens if the bird becomes disconnected from the remote in your hand? And instead of me saying, I'm not really sure, I repeat to him what I've read in the manuals and in the online reviews. I go, oh, as soon as that thing disconnects, it it turns around and it flies directly back to my feet. I'll show you. I have no idea why I decided to show him this. I actually turn off the remote and there it goes.
It just kept going.
It goes not towards me. It's going further away and it is steamrolling towards a stand of pine trees. And we see this little dot. I mean, it's not moving slowly. It's going hard towards those trees. And I go, oh, no, we better, let's go, let's go, let's go. So we jump in the cart. We race up there. We don't know where it is. I'm pretty sure I'm one flight and done with my new toy. I'm pretty sure I'm never going to hear the end of it from the guys who I said, I'll take care of this.
Oh.
And it's laying upside down deep in the woods. And I only know all of the rest of this because the GoPro was still recording.
Still recording.
The thing had tumbled through the trees, landed on its belly, landed on its back upside down, and just happened to be pointed towards the cart path. So you could see our cart pull up. You could see me kind of aimlessly wandering around. Then you see me see it and point to it. Somehow that bird survived.
Yep.
It continued flying, unlike some later iterations of the bird. But at some point I knew I was going to need to tell Gregg about these adventures because I knew for sure the ranger was going to. And then later that night in the hotel, I believe, if I remember correctly, you and Dave began sort of a frame by frame replay.
Oh yeah, it was kind of like say NTSC-B or whatever you call it there. You know, kind of like reenactment. We're like, oh, and then we're slow motion, like there goes the battery.
Yeah, I could see it come shooting out the door. And everything. And here comes the tree stand really slow, and then see it tumbling over and over again. And that was I'd like to think that was the final time that I ever acted like I knew how to fly the thing better than I actually did. Now, you know, all these years later, I think between the two of us, we've probably each got, 3,000 hours of flight time on the various birds. But what kind of a game changer was that bit of technology for the TV show?
Oh, it's huge. One of the things because I remember, because go back to that first drone we did, and we joked that I went up and kind of drifted and brought it right back down. I had people that knew I did the show call me up, and they're like, how did you get that shot?
Yeah.
Because it was a unique shot. Because again, helicopters we were staying below the tree line, because you don't need to go way up in the air to get a good view of a hole.
Right.
And I had people ask me like, how did you get that shot? And because it was unique, helicopters always went above the tree line, and we didn't want to go above the tree line. We wanted to just stay elevated shot, great view of the hole, kind of track it. And so that was the big game changer when it comes to doing the right frame, getting something unique that no one's ever seen before, and do it with the new technology, stay on top of it, which we've done, from day one. Every time a new camera comes out, we're there. A new way of shooting a camera. If it's gimbals now, and and miniatures and miniaturization with GoPros and taking them underwater and water parks and all that stuff. Yeah, we're always on that edge. And these drones was the same way. And of course, back then, it was more of like people are like, well, what's the rules of the drone? There is no rules right now with the drones. It says no one knows the rules. It's just more of being made up as we go along. Which is
why now there's a bunch of rules.
Now there's a bunch of rules. And and that's the problem is, then you have a bunch of people out there who are just literally doing stupid stuff with those drones. That's just ruining it for the actual industry. But it was a game changer, that going from that first one, the Phantom 1, which shockingly enough did not get crashed as much as the Phantom 2.
Yes.
I got plenty of calls from Bill. Hey, crash drone, bring tools. And somehow the body on the Phantom 2 was very rigid. And I remember showing up one day into the hotel, and Bill was able to hit concrete just right and bent it up so bad where I sat there with a heat gun and warmed up the plastic and reshaped it, and warmed up the plastic and reshaped it. So we at least finished the shoot for that particular property.
Yeah. The call was catastrophic collapse or crash. somehow, and the drones now have obstacle avoidance sensors built into them, but they didn't then. So without a monitor, you would think perhaps you had more room before the trees, but sometimes you didn't. And your best hope was that it would hit gently and fall on soft grass. And this particular incident that I think Gregg's alluding to, which is, I think I caught up with him in Traverse City, it landed directly on the cart path and just shattered. I mean, it was a catastrophic collapse. And that drone made it through the chute, but it didn't make it much longer than that. You know, and I was thinking about one of the things that I'm often asked is, how do you decide where you're going to go for the TV show? And my answer usually is we go where we're invited. Um, Sometimes we'll come up with a creative idea for like a theme on, you know, the 10 hardest holes or great values under $50, something like that. But quite often it's because a destination has said, we'd love to be on your TV show, and we work out the budget side of that because we do have a cost and for production and for airing all of the shows. But it was when we added the visuals from the drone at places like Arcadia Bluffs and at places like Grand Hotel, where all of a sudden national exposure became a part of what we were doing, because those were visuals that at that time nobody had been presenting. And it really is eye-popping when you see the introduction of kind of an innovative new way of presenting. And like we've said a few times, there are a lot of people doing some of those things now, but I have made the point, and this is a credit to Gregg, that anybody, and I mean literally anybody, can walk into Best Buy and grab a drone.
Yeah.
You can buy it right now. Just go right ahead. You can get the same one we use, but not very many can do with the footage what Gregg has been able to do. It's not just a matter of shooting it. And in fact, every once in a while, you'll stumble across the website for a golf course that asked us if we would do some aerials for them to use on their website. And when I give them a price, they'll decline and say, well, my neighbor's nephew's cousin's son has a drone. We'll just have him do it. And you can go to the website and you can see the end results of that, where they've not edited anything. It's literally from taking off on the ground to shaking all over the place to, it's just horrible. They'd have been better off without it. There's an art to the presentation side of all of this stuff that we do, which includes some of the moments with the host on camera, with golf club in hand, with microphone in hand. One of my favorite social media slams that I was on the receiving end of a few years ago was some guy from a golf course on the west side of Michigan. His name's Michael Card. I'll put it out there. He thought that he was really scooping the world by saying on maybe Twitter, I've seen those guys on a shoot before, and Bill Hobson requires multiple takes. I'm not sure if I've heard Gregg laugh harder than when I first showed him that tweet. So go ahead, Gregg, confirm or deny the reality of that statement from the gentleman who was, I guess, trying to hurt my feelings.
Yeah. Newsflash: television is not a complete real life. Even your reality TV, the non-scripted programming you see on television, it's somewhat still scripted. That's those people don't act like idiots all the time. But yes, no, that's the best part. And a matter of fact, I would, if you watched a whole season, maybe 2 seasons, I would put those bloopers at the end of the show.
Right.
So if we had some time to fill, and if there was some good time, I would love to have extra like minute to add all the bloopers to it.
Yep.
But yeah, there was times where, it would take, there'd be 8 takes just to get the right shot in between these 2 trees or something. It wasn't a secret. We did not make it a secret. And for this guy to somehow drop this, this large bomb, I've seen those guys, like, dude, it's television.
We actually have fun with this. It'd be pretty hard for us to hide it when we were putting it in the end credits, but hey, it takes all kinds to operate in this world. Quite often when people are watching us do what we do on location, they will wonder where the script is. If I'm doing a stand-up or an introduction and you're following along as I'm walking in some area, or we're sitting at a table surrounded by food and everything. They're always wondering, well, did you memorize this, or did you have this written? Is there a teleprompter somewhere? Let everybody know how we do these moments, these hosting moments.
Yeah, there's no teleprompter. It's literally like I say, okay, we need to talk about this. Okay, let's do it. And we'll do a run through, just a quick little dry run. And they're like, oh yeah, we forgot. We got to add that, and that, and that. Okay, let's go. Let's do it. Go ahead and record. Let's do it. And then we just make it happen. But that's skill on your side. Like, so you've been doing that, like I said, going back 30 plus years to the TV station. Even back then, teleprompters were expensive. We didn't, don't have funds for that, even at a TV station at the time.
Right.
I think about, even engineers back then made a fake teleprompter with a Commodore 64 or I think an Atari. Not to go really crazy into that, but because they were pricey. Nowadays you can just use a tablet. But no, yeah, it's just the skills with you knowing what to say. You got it down, and we'll do it. It might take 2-3 takes, but yeah, I'm always blessed when you get it down in one.
Well,
So,
would you rather have to endure the multiple takes for one of my introductions, or capture a useful bunker shot?
ooh, that's challenging. I'll probably do the multiple takes. Bunker shots can be very dangerous if you skull one out of the, especially if I'm in the line of sight.
Has been known to happen once in a while. We've also had a great deal of fun with our different partners at these destinations where we're interviewing, director of golf and general manager, and sometimes the chef or maybe the marketing director and that kind of thing. And we often encounter interview subjects who were extremely sure of themselves and confident until the camera comes out, right? We see that all the time. One young lady who's no longer part of the golf industry, but it was just a sweet lady that we would interview. Her name is Regan. I remember her nervousness had her literally shuffling out of the shot while we were standing on the deck at the golf resort where she was, to the point where I had to interview her while standing on one of her toes, just to keep her
There.
place. And it's a reminder to me that for a lot of people, the fear of public speaking is a real thing. It's a very real thing, and they can sit around the table with you for lunch and talk for hours and hours. And then when we say we're going to put this mic on you, and then you're going to stand here and you're just going to talk to Bill, and it's just going to be a conversation. It doesn't matter what we say. The sweat starts, the nervous fidgets start, and there is something to be said for having reps, having practiced, and having spent a lot of time in front of the camera. We've had some pretty fun moments with our interview guests over the years.
I can remember one right now. I think his name was Ron. I'm trying to remember his name. And we set it up the shot. We introduced to him. He was supposed to be like the local, the local guy who was like, wants people to, supposed to want people to come to the community. And he just kind of like right there on camera, like, okay, go ahead. You ask him a question. He's like, I don't know why we want people to come here.
Yes.
We're building fences and making things look beautiful. Why? I didn't move here for that.
Yes. And just so you all know, when we're invited to a destination, we allow the host of the destination to arrange the people we talk to on camera. We're not just randomly going up to somebody for the most part and saying, brag on your home or brag on your resort. In this particular case, we were on Beaver Island, Michigan. Had never been there before. You're not going to go there either. We're not going to go back. But one of the people they arranged for us to talk to made it very clear he did not want us there.
He didn't want us there.
It was really quite an awkward moment where I had to stop and go, hang on, guys, hang on. Ron, we want you to invite people here and talk about, I don't want people here.
I don't want people here.
All right, well, this is not going to work out terribly well.
That interview didn't make the cut, shockingly enough. It
did not make it into the final show. Oh man, there are so many moments that just kind of resonate in our memory banks. From the first moment that we got to capture Arcadia Bluffs on camera, and what a game changer that was, to those times when we were able to partner with unique destinations that we didn't really think we would ever go to. I mean, we did a handful of shows in Jamaica, which was just a blast to do. But we also have some of these cutting room floor moments, and I'm reminded of one in Jamaica and one in the Dominican Republic, where something was taking place in the background that certainly could not make it onto to our show or probably any other show that's on basic cable. Jamaica water aerobics. What comes to mind when I say?
Oh, you know, what's funny is I didn't even catch that until I was posting it. And I was like, I remember sitting there watching and because I remember the time, and there's a picture if you want to show it on B-roll, but there was a picture where I'm actually up over my waist holding a very expensive camera on my shoulder.
Instead of shooting from the beach, Gregg's walking out.
I'm in the water. It's very dangerous. And of course, it's not the first time I've risked a camera and lost a camera to water, to ocean, salt water, and cameras don't mix. But yeah, they're doing water aerobics, and I mean, after I was sitting there editing the footage, and I'm like, wait a minute, what is going on there? And I look back, and this poor lady lost her top while they were doing the exercise. And thank goodness we had 2 takes, because I had to go back to the other take because that was a good take. And I had to like take you off camera because you did mess up, and I kind of pieced those together. But yeah, it was. I felt bad for that lady. I was like, I mean, and she never realized it. And but I mean, I say that things like that happened. But yeah, I lost a camera doing a Carlsbad shoot in the Pacific Ocean.
We were out there for TaylorMade shooting at their world headquarters, and we wanted to get some nature scenes to kind of set the picture of the geography of where we were. So of course, you're at the Pacific, you're going to go get some shots of the Pacific. We were with Tom Waskey, who at the time was working with us as in sales and kind of helping produce. And he and I were standing back quite a ways as we watched Gregg go over to these giant boulders on the edge of the Pacific. And I thought, oh, that'll be a cool shot. He'll get the boulders and he'll get the water, and the waves were crashing. Nope. Gregg's going down on a knee, and he's lowering the camera down to basically water level to get that perspective, not realizing the waves were going to come in hot and they were going to take over everything. And they did. It's ruin the camera. They just completely swamped over the camera. As we were standing back there ways, I'm like, oh, that can't be good, because this was on tape back in the day.
Yeah.
And yeah, that camera, I don't believe was ever part of our world again.
No, salt water and tape paths does not go together. It was funny because I kept running like, it's good. It's still good. It's still good. And it's like, no, it wasn't. It decided all of a sudden, boom, dead. And I was like, yeah, once it got into electronics. But to be fair, the rock I was looking at, it was bone dry. I'm like, yeah, it's not wet. It's now the waves didn't hit that rock. So I kind of lowered the camera down to that level. And then literally the very next wave just took her right out.
Oh, that's so funny. We should also spend a moment or two talking about the crew members that we've had with us over the years. I want to start with Dave Van Bibber, who is such a kind and wonderful guy. He and his wife, Shirley, and Dave for years was part of our crew, tirelessly helping not just carry things, but set up, think of ideas that were creative to incorporate into the show. We used to have what's called a boom or a jib that was gigantic and took forever to set up. But when it was set up, the shots from it were fantastic. And Dave would lug that thing around, and the weights that went with it and the risk of losing a finger every time you set it up, and did that for a lot of years. And he's just one of the great guys. And we'll always be thankful for Dave's role in what we do. We've had your son with us. I named Miles the director of sustenance and nutrition, which means he's in charge of snacks on the road. I've been a little disappointed in his performance there recently. There's still room for growth, I think, is how you would say it in the annual review. I mean, you work in the corporate media world. Is that kind of the term we would use, as room for growth?
Oh, absolutely. Yes. Yeah. There's always room for growth. And, what do you want to say?
A lot of room for improvement.
Improvement.
However,
improvement
if we ever get into a speed eating contest,
oh boy,
against other golf shows, I'm putting Miles up there as our leadoff batter, and probably right after him, we'll put a young man named Josh, who did a few shoots with us, because we're going to win. We're going to be the gold medalist, hands down, without a doubt. Thank you to Well, Bryce Howard's helped us a little bit. We've had Matt Felton help us. We've had Matt Shucknick help us. We've had my son Bo help us on shoots before. In a little bit, we'll hear from Sean Irish, who is a little bit more recent member of our crew and has some fun stories to tell about all that. But I've tried Larry Hemmerly and Steve Mickness also helping us on a lot of shoots. My nephew Ian. I've tried to describe to people what the responsibilities are of a member of our crew when coming on a TV shoot. And here's what I tell them. You work for Gregg on this shoot. You're not working for me. I'm busy thinking of things and trying to produce the show. And basically your assignment is wherever he goes, you go. That's really kind of how it boils down. What would be your description of what somebody should be prepared for if they're working on the crew?
Don't screw up.
Don't drop anything.
Don't drop anything, which has happened many times. Believe it or not, still this equipment is still a little pricey, and we like to keep it around for at least a couple of shoots.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was a typical thing, is like don't screw up and just don't break anything. Because it's not that hard. But as I said, it's like I said, I'm sure you're the same with Bo, but with my son Miles, he when the job's done, he doesn't get to go home, but with me. So there's like criticism when I come back, especially when I'm editing. I'm editing the video, I'm editing the show. I lean over, I'm like, hey, you screwed up on that audio.
Right.
He's like, when did I do that?
In Miles's case, that would really bother him because he's
it does.
Very much a perfectionist, which I certainly appreciate. He pays attention to details, which is unusual for someone his age. And I'm really glad for that, because you and I get wrapped up in a lot of other things that are going on. What people don't understand mostly is that for most other television projects, whether it's the guys at No Laying Up, whether it's the guys at Barstool, whether it's whatever it is, when they come in to do a shoot or a show, they have a minimum of 15 to 20 people with them. I know that because a number of the destinations where we have been have turned them down and said, we just don't want to put up with all the people, or we don't have room for all of them. We're too busy. How many do you bring? And I'm like, well, bring 4 or 5 usually. And they look at you like, wait, what? How do you guys, we watch your show. How do you get all that done? I don't know what we would do with 20 people.
Right? Yeah, I never understood that. Even to this day, with technology getting more and more easier, so you can narrow those down. We've done that from day one. When someone tells me that, they're like, oh, it's going to cost $80,000 to do this, or $100,000 this job. We got to bring out 15 crew at first, and then we got to bring another 10 additionally later. And I'm just like, why? Why do you need to bring so many people? Yeah. And so, yeah, I don't understand, don't get it. And our viewers have seen our show. Why, that right there, you look at the credits, you'll see how many people are rolling that did that show for that, or did that show. Like I said, 5 would be the max. I mean, I can't imagine we did more than 5 at one point.
So 5 is when we bring like a different drone pilot, so we're not having to fly.
Right.
I'll say this without adding names in here, but back near the beginning, there was another television show in the state of Michigan, a golf show that largely was in the Metro Detroit area. And I would often be challenged by a potential destination that says, well, we're considering either you guys or that show. And I'll say to them, well, have you ever seen that show? No, because I'm not in Detroit, so I don't get to see us. Well, how about if I send you a VHS of that show? Back then it was a VHS. I said, I won't add any commentary. I'm not going to badmouth anybody. I'm very proud of the product that we put out. And I think when you see both shows side by side, your decision will be pretty simple. And I can't tell you how many times I sent out that show, and shortly thereafter I would get the call that said, oh man, you're right. And that's a credit to the work you do as producer and editor and all that stuff. I don't know how you can even see straight after all these things, because it's not your only gig in the world. So Gregg's a busy guy, but let's keep going. And I don't know if we've got 25 more left in us, but we've got a few more for sure. And as long as it's still fun, and I think that's the note I'd like to close on. neither of us, I don't think, have ever come to the end of a project or a shoot and just said, well, that was just miserable and horrible. I can't believe we had to do that. This is still playing in life's candy store, especially compared to people who have more taxing jobs that they dread going to every single day. And I think part of the reason for our longevity is that we kind of get along. So thank you for that. For putting up with me, I guess is the way I would say it.
Like I said, you got the passion for golf. Like I said, my passion is always, like I said, creating something that looks good in video.
Yeah.
And yeah, they both come together well. And I said, and it's great to see these golf courses. I used to golf when I was a kid. I always told myself I can't afford it. But it's one of those great things to go see a golf. I mean, like right now, my son, when he comes with us during the short times before he graduates from school, it's just he looks at it, it's like Arcadia Bluffs. When he hears that we have a trip to Arcadia Bluffs, he's just like, oh, I'm there. That's, he loves just to see the place.
Yeah.
And that right there alone is, I mean, he said it's not a shabby job when you get to see those. I envy the people who work at Arcadia Bluffs that call that their job, and they get to see that every day. So
yeah, and we eat well too.
Yeah, the Ruthie's a delight. Is
right.
a bonus.
Good stuff. All right, thanks for looking back with us, and we'll look forward to some fun in the days ahead.
Sounds great. Thanks, guys.
So I have to ask, Bill, from the day you first conceived the idea, at what point in this journey did you finally say, this is going to work?
I have a very good friend, Tom Waskey, who was with me at the very beginning to help with sales. He was also the one who hired me to do the Saginaw Valley football broadcast. So in one sense, he was my boss, and in the other sense, I was his boss. And as we started to have more conversations with potential partners and destinations, what originally would happen was we would have to explain to them who we were and what we were doing. And then at some point along the way, and I wish I could pinpoint it, but let's say 5, 6, 7 years in, we found that we didn't have to explain that quite as often. In fact, sometimes every once in a while, the calls were coming to us saying, hey, we've seen this. Would you consider doing that for us? No, it wasn't very frequent, but we could see this kind of a shift in the momentum. We had some partnerships early on that established credibility. Instead of doing business with what normal sports talk radio business is, I call it beer and boobs radio because it's usually male oriented only. It's adult establishments, it's alcohol, it's gambling, it's all those things. We just didn't take that route. And instead, we partnered with national brands. In the early days, Ashworth for our apparel, Nike was our clubs, and later it would become TaylorMade, then it would become Callaway, and now it's Titleist. But we would deal with places like Arcadia Bluffs, Grand Hotel. And one of my promises to all of our partners was this: you will never have to apologize to your customers for something they heard on any of my programs. We're not trying to be edgy. We're not trying for clickbait in this era. Back then, there was no such thing as clickbait.
Yeah.
And we just wanted to do a dignified but fun presentation of the story of each place. And having some of those national brands on with us was a big stepping stone in that direction, because once you start to establish, oh, okay, so the names that really are well known in this industry, they're partnering with these guys. That must mean something. So we were really, really blessed early on. And a lot of that credit goes to Tom for the hard work he did in opening some of those partnerships up.
I have to ask this personal question because I've known you for the better part of those 25 years when we were both a lot younger. What role did your faith have in all of this and how the show's presented?
Yeah. This is going to sound very preachy, and I don't mean it to be that, because Art, you know me, I am very far from perfect. Very far from perfect.
Come to my world.
But I really want to do everything that I do with the approach of honoring the Lord. I don't want to embarrass the cause of Christ. Like I said, I'm not perfect, but we have some standards that we've established through the show. And it's not because I'm trying to earn some sort of a certificate for piousness. It's just because this is kind of how I do things. And
It's who you are.
yeah, my business isn't really that different from how I conduct my normal life. So somebody says to me, why aren't you advertising for this brand? And I say, well, it's because I don't believe in that brand being a positive influence on our society. A good example of that would be these days, if we wanted to, we could do business with any of a million different cannabis shops.
Sure.
I'm not going to do that. We could do business with a boatload of casinos that advertise their big pro. It's just not what we do. If that's something that others enjoy, absolutely fine with that. That's not my business. I'm not trying to live anybody else's life. I'm just trying to stay true to kind of my core. And I've been told a few times that I live in the wrong decade, and that's probably true. You know, we still do things on a handshake basis. We very rarely have a written contract with anybody. I've been burned a few times by that, but it's okay. We're doing okay. The lights are still on, so that's a good sign.
And it's interesting the way you handle that, because if you go to, say, Brimley, where there's a casino attached to a big, beautiful golf course and a resort,
Yeah.
your focus is on the golf course.
Yeah.
And the other focus you have, which is your other passion, food.
Yes. If you could see my my organized folders on my computer, you will see that there's a folder for pictures from destinations, from radio, from TV crew, from this, and then there's a folder just called food. And I was just cleaning some of that up a couple days ago, and oh my goodness, the fact that I haven't yet had a quintuple bypass is a real testament to the Lord's kindness, because most places that we go, they want us to sample their very best, and we are all but happy to oblige. And we really have been quite spoiled over the years.
Well, Bill, we spent these 20 minutes looking back. I think in conclusion, we ought to start looking forward. 25th season is coming up in 2024. What's it going to be like for you?
I was approached by a man in the parking lot of a resort last summer. I didn't know who he was, but he watches the show, and he said some very kind things. And at the end, he looks at me kind of squinty eyed. He says, "Hey, when are you going to retire?" And I said,
I've heard that.
and go play golf? I mean, what am I going to retire for? And so we came to this, you know, you can have these milestone moments like a 25th anniversary, and you do have some time to kind of reflect and say, all right, here's where we've been. This has been an amazing ride. Are we done, or do we keep on going? And as you and I speak, the finishing touches are being put on our brand new TV and golf simulator studio that will serve as a hub year round for content like equipment reviews and different fun tutorials and some instructions that we'll have with PGA pros. And I decided it's either go big or go home, and we're going to keep going. We're going to go big. Our calendar for 2024 is already almost all filled in. And the love of this game still runs strong in me, but probably more than that, the love of telling stories still runs strong. And that's something that I think you and I share in common. We just love to hear what makes people tick and what's brought them along the way to certain points. And then we talk about my crew, like Gregg Hall, his son Miles, and Sean Irish, Dave Van Bibber, who was with us for so many years, just helping carry stuff around and come up with creative ideas. And then I think about the chances that I've had to go out and make memories with my son, Bo, with my wife coming along with me whenever she can, or whenever the destination is especially attractive. We were just in Mexico a couple of weeks ago. How could I ever not want to keep doing that? Here's the deal I'll make with you. If my fastball is currently at 100 miles per hour, and maybe it's in the low 90s now, if it ever gets into the low 80s and I've lost it, you tell me, okay? And until then, I think this is kind of the chapter that we've created, and we're going to keep on going and have a lot of fun in this game.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because that's what I tell people when they ask me, when are you going to retire?
Right.
My answer is never. But in reality, I know that if the Lord says it's time because I can't do something, then I'll know it's time.
Right.
Till that day comes, here we are, friend.
On the other side of my studio, there's a poster, front page of the Detroit Free Press, the day Ernie Harwell was fired, oddly enough, by Bo Schembechler. But it reminds me when I look at it, number one, we're all expendable, although Ernie wasn't because he was brought back. Number two, it reminds me of a quote that he said on the air many years ago. He was giving the injury lineup before a game, and he said, so-and-so is listed as day-to-day. But then again, aren't we all? And that's kind of the approach that I take. So if you don't mind me quoting Coach Harbaugh, he believes in attacking each day with an enthusiasm unknown to mankind. I'm just grateful for every day. You know, before you and I started talking today, another big box of stuff arrived for us to open up and do a review of, and the impact of our audience continues to make our show, what's the word I'm looking for? Valid, I think is the word I'm looking for.
Relevant.
As long as people are interacting with us, we'll keep going and being thankful for all of it.
Well, Bill, you know how much I respect you, even though we kid each other unmercifully sometimes.
Yeah.
I do have a great deal of respect for you and congratulate you on 24 years and can't wait to see the 25th.
Well, now you've heard the majority of the story. I'm sure there are things I'll think of later that I wish I had said. And if we did not personally thank you by name, but you are one of those key people that have come along during these last couple of decades to help us, thank you. Just know how much I appreciate that. I do believe strongly in something I said in my conversation with Jon Bloom, that Michigan Golf Live has never really been a show about golf. It's been a show about people who love golf and their stories. And we'll continue telling those stories. I can't wait to see what comes next. We're nowhere near being done. And as long as the Lord grants me the health to do it and the partnerships to make it all possible, we'll continue plugging along, celebrating the greatest game on earth. Finally, thank you. Thank you. Whether this is the first time you've ever encountered what we do at Michigan Golf Live, or whether you've been with us throughout this entire journey, all of it comes down to those who are watching, those who are listening, those who are then going to play at the destinations we feature or buy the equipment that we're reviewing. You're engaging with us through this game is what makes it all possible. So thank you for doing that. Here's to as many more years as the Lord has for us. Cannot wait to see you throughout season 25 of Michigan Golf Live. Let the party begin.